joining us for another episode of the Druber Health Podcast. Today we are going to focus on two different areas. We're going to talk about lectins and we are going to talk about deuterium. Now, those two honestly don't match up super well. It probably would have been better for me to match up deuterium with like phytic acid, more similar foods, but we're just going to roll with it. So starting off here regarding lectins, some of you may have already heard about lectins. They were actually the very first anti-nutrient that I had ever heard of quite a few years ago, and was something that I started looking out for probably right along the same time that I started looking into vegetable oils. I started also looking into lectins a little bit more. So lectins are a plant protein, and it is essentially a defense chemical to deter animals from eating them. Lectins are a major gut disruptor, and much like gluten, it can lead to breaking down our digestive organ linings and causing food to essentially leak out of the digestive system. Basically, these hurt our cells that make up our gut lining and gut membrane. So the damage from these lectins will cause our gut to become permeable, and this allows like smaller microparticles like food to actually move across the gut membrane and outside of our gut and into our bodies. And when this happens, our bodies treat the food substances as foreign bodies and allergens, and ultimately it leads to inflammation and can lead to chronic inflammation. So if you're dealing with gut issues, that's typically what that is, that inflammation is caused. Now, there obviously is food particles that are causing your gut to become permeable, but then you also have food that isn't causing that, but then also becomes an allergen. So if you are eating certain foods with, let's say like gluten, or after you're eating gluten, any of these things, if you take a food sensitivity test and your gut is disrupted and is permeable, a lot of the foods that you are just eating in general are going to show up on a sensitivity test because these food particles are crossing the membrane. That does not mean that these foods are causing damage to your gut. Your body is just now treating these food particles as allergens. So it's really unfortunate. So if you've developed some sort of intolerance to certain food groups that aren't necessarily considered, damaging to the gut, that's probably why that's happening to you. Lectins are best known for being found in tomatoes and peppers, but can also be found in potatoes, eggplants, lentils, peanuts, almonds, beans, chickpeas, etc. Basically, all legumes contain lectins. So something that I want you guys to keep in mind is that beans and legumes have essentially contained every single anti-nutrient that we've talked about. So definitely keep that in mind if you guys are adding these into your diet. It's really important to make sure that you are boiling and soaking these to help remove the anti-nutrient contents. Like I just mentioned, it's pretty fortunate for us that there's a way to decrease the amount of lectins in many foods. So you can boil, soak, ferment, peel, and de-seed lectin-containing foods to reduce and remove the lectin hazard. So that is another reason why I peel my potatoes. I don't eat the peel on apples. Make sure you're not eating seeds or cores. Those will typically have the highest amount of lectins in the fruits that you're eating. And now, most of those options I mentioned are pretty straightforward, but I would recommend doing some more research on your own on just how to soak or ferment lectin-containing foods. I don't enjoy beans enough to really put a lot of effort into making sure they're lectin-free, phytic acid-free, oxalate-free, so I just kind of don't really include them in my diet. But if you're a bean person and you want to continue eating them, make sure you are doing research and putting in the effort to remove these, anti-nutrients. And like I just mentioned, so I typically don't eat the peels on apples anymore. You can peel them. I usually just cut them up and just don't eat the peel. I just kind of eat around it. So not only are you removing the anti-nutrient and lectin hazard, but you're also taking steps in avoiding pesticide consumption. Typically, the peel is going to contain the highest concentration of chemicals and pesticides if you're eating non-organic. I do have a list. I don't have a specific amounts of lectins in the foods, but I can, if you reach out to me, I'll give you a list of high lectin foods. So I have them broken down into high lectin legumes, high lectin fruits, and high lectin grains. So if you're interested in those, let me know, and I will pass those along to you. All right, next up here we've got deuterium. And deuterium was something that I came across this past year, actually. Started doing more research on it, and there's been more stuff coming out about it. Something that's I'm not really going to touch base on today, but might touch base on the future is the proliferation of specific like hydrogen water. I see it all over social media now. There's a lot of people that are drinking it. It's like hydrogen ionized water, which is supposed to be super healthy. I have some more research to do on that before I really start talking about that. But we will be talking about a specific type of water today and how that can benefit you. But that being said, going into deuterium. So deuterium is a hydrogen isotope that contains a single proton, electron, and a neutron. The presence of this neutron makes this isotope heavier than the normal hydrogen atom. So because hydrogen is an element and cannot be broken down any further, this means that deuterium is typically transferred and accumulated across nature. So it is naturally occurring in the food that we eat, the liquids we drink, and the air we breathe. Water, scientifically known as H2O, forms when two hydrogen molecules react with an oxygen molecule. These hydrogen molecules can often be made up of deuterium, the hydrogen isotope. So all water typically contains deuterium at some level, but some types of water have more or less deuterium, and we'll go over that specifically. I think on average, natural water contains anywhere from 150 to 155 parts per million of deuterium. Plants store deuterium in their sugar/carbohydrate molecules and contain high concentrations of deuterium. Fat, on the other hand, contains much lower levels of deuterium due to the carbon-hydrogen composition of the fatty acids. So, proliferation of deuterium. Due to the villainization of fats in the late 1900s, modern diets have morphed into a carbohydrate, sugar-heavy focus. So most processed foods contain sugars, carbohydrates, and plant-based ingredients. So if you look at agricultural practices, you'll find that a vast majority of our animals are grain-fed, which grains are high in deuterium, thus leading grain-fed animals to also contain higher amounts of deuterium in their meat and fat. All of these things have led to an overall increase in deuterium in our diets. So, let's talk about water again. Water, H2O, is made up of 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. Now, there are different forms of water. So that's like the basic, healthiest form of water, H2O. There is HDO, which is a water molecule that would contain 1 normal hydrogen atom and 1 deuterium atom. And then there's D2O, which is water, but it contains 2 deuterium atoms instead of 2 normal hydrogen atoms. So D2O, deuterium water, is heavy water and is used to actually cool reactors like nuclear reactors. So just because it is harder to break down because it is heavier. Now tap water typically has roughly 150 parts per million of deuterium. Ocean water is roughly 155 parts per million deuterium. And glacial water is roughly 90 parts per million deuterium. So glacial water is typically going to be the lowest amount of like naturally concentrated deuterium you'll find in nature. And water at higher elevations tend to contain less concentrations of deuterium. So if you are up at a higher elevation or you're drinking glacial water, you're doing your body a real service there. All right, so let's go over the negative effects of deuterium now that you kind of have an understanding on what it is and where it is. So to simply put it, our bodies and all of its processes are designed to work most efficiently with normal hydrogen atoms. When cellular functions that require a hydrogen atom are replaced with a deuterium heavy hydrogen atom, it causes these processes to occur more slowly due to the weight and stress of the heavier isotope. This causes a lot of havoc in our bodies and is reflected in a multitude of different ways. So any reaction in our body is produced with the activity of an enzyme. Now, an enzyme is a protein compound made up of amino acids. And I'm sure you guys have all heard of at least amino acids in some sort of way. I know that in the working out community, you hear of like BCAAs, branched chain amino acids. Amino acids are crucial to the composition of proteins in our body. It's what our body uses to create things. And enzymes are one of those proteins that are made up of amino acids that are super crucial to the functions within our body. These enzyme reactions in our body are occurring automatically and very quickly. So we're talking hundreds of times per second. So when deuterium is brought into the mix here to these enzymes, these reactions start happening slower, much slower, which basically means that our body and these enzymes are just functioning at a much lower capacity, making things slower, making them less healthy, less likely to keep up with production and damage. Now, deuterium also negatively affects the electron transport chains in mitochondria, and we talked about mitochondria during the cooking oil episode, so if you're interested in hearing more about mitochondria, definitely go back, give that one a listen. But referring to the mitochondria, this means that when the electron transport chains in the mitochondria are affected, your mitochondria are working at a very limited capacity, also slowing things down, making things less efficient. So, the Krebs cycle, which is an energy cycle found within our mitochondria, it's basically a 10-step cycle, and it's an 10-step enzyme-based chain of reactions. That's a better way of putting it. So each step of the Krebs cycle actually removes a hydrogen atom. Now, the heavier hydrogen atoms, specifically deuterium, because they're heavier, are much more difficult to remove, which just gives you a better picture of why deuterium is slowing down these processes in our body. When deuterium is used in our DNA strands, instead of normal hydrogen molecules, it produces DNA that is weaker and more likely to break. Now, sustained breakage and slower repair of DNA molecules creates a host of metabolic problems and reduction in crucial cellular processes. So, for example, elevated levels of deuterium will affect our body's production and function of cancer-killing T cells. And here's a study that I found pretty interesting. So, there was a study that looked at fat stem cell differentiation and showed that normal and high levels of deuterium within the cell caused fat cells to differentiate as white fat cells, which white fat cells are considered unhealthy. That's essentially subcutaneous body fat. And so it differentiated into white cells instead of brown fat cells, which is considered healthy, thermogenic, useful fat. So this study is potentially pointing to the fact that deuterium in our bodies could lead to an increase in subcutaneous fat and proliferation of stem cells to white fat. Now, fortunately for us, our bodies have systems in place that naturally deplete levels of deuterium in our bodies. However, due to the overconsumption of high deuterium-containing foods, our bodies have become overloaded and oversaturated with deuterium, which makes it impossible for the natural depletion to keep pace. Fortunately for the health of humanity, there are a number of ways to deplete and also limit the consumption of deuterium, which is good. It just takes some proper awareness here. So studies have shown that deuterium depletion reduced fasting glucose concentration and insulin resistance. Now, insulin resistance is a huge and important marker for metabolic dysfunction and diabetes. So things you can do in aiding depletion of deuterium. So quality sleep, I'm going to say, is like the most important factor here. It's crucial in assisting the depletion of deuterium. Basically, the processes that deplete deuterium in our bodies are most efficient and active when we are sleeping. And sleep is important for so many reasons. When we are sleeping, our body is taking time to recover any of the physical, metabolic, and honestly mental damage that we take throughout the day. So when we are not getting sustained quality sleep, we are only falling behind on our body's ability to recover and improve itself. So on one side, there is a rate at which our body is sustaining damage, taking in toxins, which is actually really high right now. And based off of everything else we went through, we know that our bodies are having to handle a huge load of toxins. But on the other side, there's a rate at which our body is able to recover through sleep. And if those do not line up appropriately, if you are not getting more sleep or equal sleep to the rate at which you are taking damage and those toxins, it's not going to be good for your overall health. In fact, it's going to be extremely detrimental. Another thing is when we drink water, we obviously intake deuterium. You just can't get around that. However, you can buy deuterium-depleted water, which contains typically less than 125 parts per million of deuterium. So this is a great way to be actively lowering deuterium intake. It's relatively easy to do. You're just going to be spending a little bit more on water. Physical activity will also aid in the depletion of deuterium. So just another reason why being physically active is so important for a number of reasons. Just like sleep, our muscles contain a ton of mitochondria, and we know how important mitochondria is to our body. So the more healthy muscle that you have on your body, the more efficient your body is going to be. Now, they say that muscle burns obviously more energy than fat, right? But just by having muscle on your body, you'll have a higher metabolism. And that's true because in your muscle, you're going to contain mitochondria, and those are energy producing cells. So your body is going to actually be able to utilize energy more efficiently if you have more muscle. You'll have more mitochondrial cells in your body to use, and therefore it'll be more efficient in utilizing energy that you are taking in the form of food. Now, I'm not going to get into a whole list of things why physical activity is important. It just is. At some point, I might do a specific episode on that. But please get moving, stay active, find an activity that you enjoy, and make sure that you are keeping up with it. Next, I'm going to be referencing the ketogenic diet and carnivore diet, and even just like fasting and intermittent fasting. Now, what those diets are going to do is they are going to allow you to utilize your fat stores and its consumption of the fat stores. Whereas if you are in a carb-heavy diet, you're less likely to be utilizing your current fat stores. And so we gain body fat and subcutaneous fat by taking in excess carbs and sugars that our body is unable to utilize, and it gets stored up. Now, these fat molecules, they're comprised of hydrogen-carbon chains, with some of the carbon atoms being swapped out for deuterium atoms. Now, referencing the ketogenic diet again, this diet was actually designed in the 1800s to treat epilepsy and brain disorders. And when you are on the ketogenic diet, you're typically taking in less carbs and sugars and grains and that sort of things. And what it's allowing you to do is it's allowing your body to create and repair and actually utilize mitochondria more efficiently. So it's a mitochondrial efficient diet. And a lot of times this is a jumpstart people need to start seeing progress in some of the health issues that they are experiencing. Unfortunately, because it's a diet-based treatment, doctors are less likely to prescribe it because it's harder to keep patients to a routine and sticking to that diet. Now, I do know that the ketogenic diet actually has higher success rates in treating epilepsy and other mental health disorders than medication. But like I said, it's easier to prescribe medication than it is a diet. So because most of the deuterium that we're taking in is from our food and the liquids that we're drinking, diet is a really useful tool in limiting and depleting the deuterium in our bodies. So if you are interested in trying out a ketogenic style diet or intermittent fasting, I do have some experience in those, so you can feel free to reach out to me. As far as like other fasting methods, I don't really have a whole lot of experience, and you'd probably have to do your own research in those areas. So when specifically looking at food types, grasses naturally are going to be lower in deuterium than grains or other vegetables and plants that are more carbohydrate and sugar rich. So if you are intaking a lot of like starches and high carbohydrate foods, you're going to be intaking more deuterium. If you are taking in more grass-based and grass-fed food bases, so like grass-fed beef, grass-fed animals, that sort of thing, you are going to be allowing your body to intake lower levels of deuterium. And I can't remember if I mentioned this before, but fats, when compared to sugars and carbohydrates, are going to have much lower levels of deuterium. So fats are going to be a safer option as far as limiting your deuterium consumption, and specifically healthy fats. So I'm a huge supporter of getting in a solid amount of healthy, saturated fats. If you can do that, you are not only providing your body with crucial building materials, but you are also limiting the amount of deuterium that you're intaking. So that's win-win-win on multiple different fronts. And now I'm going to give you some low deuterium food options. So organic avocados are going to be a little bit lower, so those would be like 130 parts per million deuterium. Organic, grass-fed, grass-finished animal meat is going to be typically in the 130 parts per million range. Organic, grass-fed, grass-finished tallow, lard, and animal fats are going to be even lower than that. It's going to be like 116 to 130 parts per million. Organic olive oil is going to be around the 130 parts per million mark. Avocado oil, about the same. And then organic, grass-fed, grass-finished dairy is going to be in the like 115 to 130 parts per million. So dairy is awesome, and I could not recommend dairy more. Just make sure you're getting in, organic, grass-fed if you can. Obviously, like, we're reaching these winter months here, and it's pretty common practice for a lot of these farms to add in some grains during the winter, just because it's harder for them to supply their foods with the natural grazing and pasture grass. So it's pretty typical, but I just want to remind you guys that getting grass-fed, grass-finished, even if it's not 100% grass-fed, grass-finished, is still going to be much better than just getting straight-up grain-fed animals. Now, one of the things I find most interesting about deuterium is its effects on cancer, and how deuterium depletion can really help us fight and overcome cancer. So low deuterium diets and the consumption of deuterium depleted water have actually shown the ability to slow down and completely stop the growth and spread of cancer cells, which is huge. Now, in general, having lower than average levels of deuterium in our body is actually going to help us prevent the formation of cancer cells, which is huge. Nobody wants cancer, and it's an extremely devastating disease. So if you know somebody who is going through cancer treatment right now, maybe pass this information on to them, because you could be giving them tools that they can use to kind of take control of their battle. So you don't need a doctor to prescribe deuterium depleted water. You don't need a doctor to prescribe diet. These are all things that, they can be doing and their families can be helping out with. And when people are going through cancer treatment, it's actually really empowering for them to feel like they have some control over what they're doing and in their fight against cancer. I know cancer has personally affected my life in many ways. I've had, a bunch of different extended family members that have gone through it. And then I have had my brother Dalton went through cancer when he was in 5th grade and I was in 6th grade. And obviously at that point in time, I was still young. I didn't know much, but people going through cancer, they go through a lot. And I know Dalton went through an incredible amount. He had all sorts of complications pop up. He went through rounds of radiation and chemo, bone marrow stem cell transplant. And it takes a really large toll on your body. And during that time, your body's sustaining a lot of damage. And it took my brother a very long time to come back to his normal functioning after battling cancer. And you still see the effects that are limiting him today. That could be related to, his gluten intolerance, digestive issues, and all sorts of other things. It really harms the function of our bodies. And what I'm really seeing through, all my research is that we can be doing so much more to prevent a lot of these diseases. Right now I'm thankful for the medical system that was able to save my brother. But you can really see that the system is set up to just treat through pharmaceuticals and drugs, and there isn't an emphasis at all on prevention and healthy lifestyle choices. Now, I understand that healthy lifestyle choices are harder to prescribe. It's much easier to just give people a drug. Taking a pill is much easier than the formation of new dietary habits and healthier choices. It just takes a lot more work and effort, but nothing good in life comes without effort. And that's why your dedication, your discipline, and your focus is going to be a massive tool in your health journey. And I'm hoping that by supplying all of this information to you, it makes it easier to apply this to your lifestyle choices and your diet, and makes it easier to just be focused and disciplined regarding all of these things. Information is power, but a lot of this can be overwhelming and people just don't know where to start. So if you're having a hard time figuring out where to begin, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I am more than happy to help everyone figure out where they can start making changes. So today's episode marks the end of our initial series covering things to look out for in foods. Really, it was just a lot of things that, you won't find ingredient lists and are harder to look out for. But I wanted to make sure that I gave you guys the tools to look out for these. I know it might have seemed kind of depressing learning about all of this stuff, but it's important that we understand what to look for. Now, moving forward here, as we get into our next series, we're going to be able to focus on more so all of the good things in foods as we focus on specific food groups. Our next episode is going to be focusing on dairy, and I am super pumped about that. I cannot wait to start discussing and sharing all the wonderful things about dairy with you guys. If you have any questions about this episode or prior episodes, don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can reach out to me via Facebook, Instagram, text, email, whatever contact you have for me. Just feel free. I am an open book regarding this information. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Druber Health Podcast. Stay tuned for the next episode. Stay healthy, and we'll see you next time.